All right, to get started today, here's what I want everyone to do. I want you in your mind's eye to picture a figure who exemplifies being a rebel. Go ahead, think of someone that when you think of the word rebel, this is the person who pops into your brain. Now, I'm going to do something cool. I'm going to read your mind and tell you who you're thinking about. In fact, let me start eliminating some obvious ones just to show you that I can do this. You are not thinking of Galileo. You are not thinking of Joan of Arc. You are not thinking of Harriet Tubman or Nelson Mandela or Geronimo or Cesar Chavez, even though they're all rebels. The person you are thinking of is the ultimate American rebel, Mr. Fred Rogers. I know, it's like I'm reading your mind. Okay, you weren't thinking of Fred Rogers, but I'm going to make the case that when you think of a rebel, you should think of Fred Rogers because he was the original 1960s rebel. He led a rebellion not against the man and not against an institution. He led a rebellion bigger than that. It was a rebellion against a culture of noise and distraction and hurry. See, already in his day, the pressure in children's programming was for more noise, more stimulation, more cameras, more excitement, get those eyeballs, get the attention of the kids, engage them. And Fred Rogers pushed back on all of that. He refused to go along with that. Instead, he embraced a show that was predicated on calm and quiet. And that's what he did for many of us in our childhoods. He created this space in our day that was marked with quiet reprieve. He created a show that moved slowly and moved at the speed of love. Now, this wasn't just something that he put into children's programming because he believed that's what was best for kids. This was a value he lived out, or you could say this was a cause he rebelled against the man for his entire life. You might not know that he began every single staff meeting he led with 60 seconds of silence. He would gather his staff around, and before they did whatever they had to do, he would say, listen, we're going to take 1 minute. I'll keep track of time, and I want you to reflect. I want you to take inventory. I want you to think of someone who's impacted your life, and just give them 60 seconds of silence. You say, okay, that's fine. I appreciate the fact that he lived out that value, but he took it to new levels and almost ridiculous ones. One time, Mr. Rogers was invited to the White House. And he was invited there for a conference on television and children's education. And he had a meeting. And at this meeting were all the highest executives of PBS and Al Gore and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. So he's at this meeting with all of his bosses and the leader of the free world. And guess how he starts his meeting with them? With a minute of silence. You guys aren't too busy for this, are you? Good. We're going to start with a minute of silence, and I want you to take 1 minute of silence and reflect. And then, as if that were not rebellious enough, he turned that quiet amplifier all the way up to 11 when he received a Lifetime Achievement Emmy. Now, every time you win an Emmy, you go up on stage and you make your speech, right? If you have never seen his speech for when he received his Lifetime Emmy, it's worth your time to go on YouTube and watch it. Because as he goes up on stage and he holds up his Emmy, guess how he begins his speech? By inviting not just the live audience in the room, but inviting the entire nation who's watching to have a moment of silence while he keeps track of time on his watch. Now, initially, as you watch the video, there's laughter in the audience as people think this is some kind of joke, but then they realize he's serious, and this calmed hush falls over the crowd, which quickly gives way to tears and running mascara among television celebrities because Mr. Rogers invited them into a moment of silence. Silence is a powerful thing. And Fred Rogers embraced this. In fact, here's something that he shared with the world about why he lived this rebellious life against noise and hurry and distraction and busyness. Fred Rogers said this. He said, silence is the greatest gift we have. Now, he didn't just believe in the power of a moment of silence with yourself to collect your thoughts, to take inventory, to reflect on life. Mr. Rogers was also an ordained minister and a graduate of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. And he understood the power of a moment of silence with God. Now, if you're going to embrace what Mr. Rogers said is the greatest gift we have, silence, you're going to have to be a bigger rebel than he was. Because culture has only gotten more hurried since Mr. Rogers was in the neighborhood. Things have gotten noisier, things have gotten louder, more and more noise and volume and stimulation are all around us. I mean, it's funny to think that Fred Rogers called animated television shows a bombardment on our children in his generation. But think of the world that we live in now. Social media has given every resident of the world a megaphone to shout into. So much of what passes as the news is nothing more than a noisy vomiting of opinions at best and misleading propaganda at worst. And as if that were not enough, all of us carry around all of the noise, stimulation, distraction, and entertainment of the world in our front pockets. It's harder than ever to embrace the gift of silence. Now, last week, as we started this series, I said that in life, innovation always outpaces evaluation and regulation. Something new happens, something changes the way we interface with the world, with each other, with work, with our schedules, and because there's some benefit to it, we adopt that innovation, but there's always this learning curve between adoption and evaluation and understanding of some of the unforeseen or long-term consequences of this innovation, and then and only then can we regulate it. So as we look at the fact that our world is getting to be a noisier and busier place, and because a century ago, our world was a pretty quiet place. And then there was the innovation of the radio, which gave way to the innovation of television, which gave way to the innovation of the internet and smartphones and streaming services and all the things we have in our world today. Things are just getting louder and louder. What are we learning as we evaluate what this innovation is doing to us? Well, it's no surprise that the early indications aren't all positive. What I want to do is I want to show you a very unique way and overlooked way that this culture of noise we live in is having a very negative impact on your health. Think about a recent time when you were in a noisy environment carrying on a conversation. Maybe you were in a coffee shop or the Hope Church lobby or the lunchroom, or I would say the bar, but you're church people, you don't go to the bar. Just a noisy place where there are several conversations going on, but you want to focus on one conversation in front of you. Now, what you probably don't know is that when that happened, a very highly developed region of your brain activated and did a job that you were not even aware of so that you could block out all the irrelevant stimuli and focus on the conversation you wanted to have. This is an ability called sensory gating. It is the ability your brain has to, without you giving any conscious energy to it, block out all the things you don't want to pay attention to and focus on the things you do want to pay attention to. This is why if you like to do work in a coffee shop, you can get some work done even though the barista is steaming milk and there's conversations going around and the kitchen's making meals and so much activity is going on, but you're focused right here on this. This is why you can go to Costco, and if you're not there to buy a television, you can walk right past the TVs and go for whatever you're there to buy and block out the irrelevant stimuli. Just kidding, a new TV is always relevant. But anyway, this is the ability your brain has to say, no, we're not paying attention to that. We're focusing on this thing that I perceive to be relevant. And so it activates that part of your brain and blocks out all the irrelevant noise. Now, the challenge is we're living in a culture of noise where our brains have to do more sensory gating than any other people group who have come before us because there's more noise and stimulation than any other people group that have come before us. So, what happens when the sensory gating area of your brain gets overtaxed? Answer: not good things, as you might imagine. Now, your ability to sensory gate is already taking up a certain amount of energy and brain power that you have. This is why if you are at the coffee shop, you can focus better if you put in the earbuds or the noise-canceling headphones, because that part of your brain can rest because you blocked the irrelevant distraction and you can focus on your work now. Or have you ever been in a place where you're driving somewhere new, you're finding a new, dentist or, building a business, whatever, and your GPS takes you and it says you've arrived, but you don't see where it is, so you're like looking around, like, where is this place? Have you ever turned down the radio while you're looking for that place? How many of you have done that? You've turned down the radio? Okay, the radio is not impeding your ability to see. Do you know why you do that? It's because your brain says, hey, we're burning some energy blocking out that irrelevant stimuli. We can focus all of our energy if we turn this down, even though it's not technically in the way. That's how that works, okay? So it burns energy in your brain to activate this area so that you can focus on what's relevant. Well, research has shown that there's a correlation between people with any kind of sensory gating deficiency and chronic fatigue syndrome. In other words, if you have a slightly lower or handicapped ability to block irrelevant stimuli, or even if you overload that area of your brain, what results is a very tired brain and then a very tired body. But other studies have shown that a very high correlation between extreme sensory gating deficiency and schizophrenia. In other words, your ability to block out irrelevant stimuli is literally keeping you sane. So what happens in a culture where there's more noise, more stimuli, more distraction than ever before? And what can we do about this? Well, this series isn't about time hacks. It's not about productivity hacks. It's not about returning to some, like I said last week, mythical pre-digital utopia that never existed and getting rid of our phones. This series is about how to live life at the pace of Jesus. How to live a life at the rhythm and pace that Jesus modeled for us. Because when Jesus lived, he invited anyone who followed him into his rhythm, his pace, his approach to life. In fact, he gave this unique invitation that we looked at last Sunday. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." So if this pace of life has left you tired, fatigued, weary, burdened, living in this world we live in, Jesus says, I want you to come to me, and I will give you what our culture is not currently giving you, what your schedule is not currently giving you, what your pace of life is not currently giving you. I will give you rest. And then he said, take my yoke upon you. And the yoke, again, in that generation, that was the teaching of a rabbi. That was his approach to life, work, marriage, family, his approach to life. Jesus said, well, take my approach to life on you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. At my inner core, that's who I am, Jesus says. I'm gentle and humble, and you will find rest for your souls. You might still have a lot of responsibility, but you can approach all of it with a rested soul. He says, for my yoke is easier. Last week we said that word is translated more accurately as kind. My approach to life is kind, and my burden is light. But as we go through this series, today and the next 2 weeks, every week I'm going to introduce you to a specific teaching of the yoke of Jesus. Something specific in his approach to life. And when we see that, most of us will be strongly tempted to disregard it and ignore it. And the reason why is because on the nose, it looks like Jesus is recommending one more thing to add to your already busy schedule. He's saying, here's one thing to do that already is on top of all the other things you have to do, like work and raise kids and all the busy things we have in life. But to look at it that way is like the drowning man in the ocean rejecting the life vest, saying, I'm already drowning, I can't take on any more burden. I don't want that life jacket. No. The life jacket is what pushes you above the wave. The yoke of Jesus, the approach of Jesus, the practices of Jesus are to your soul, are to your inner life, what the life vest is to the drowning man, what helium is to the balloon. It is something that is easy. It is something that is light. So these are not things to add on top of your busy to-do list. This is a rhythm and approach to life that, when practiced, will give you buoyancy. in your life, will give you rest in your souls. Because the weariness that we experience every day, the weariness comes from being yoked to anything other than Jesus. The culture of busyness, the culture of hurry, the culture of distraction, these lead us to being weary and burdened. So today, we're going to learn one practice of Jesus, something he modeled for us, something he invited us into, that when practiced will lead to more space within our souls and a healthier and flourishing inner life. And by the way, if you're not a Christian, you're like, why would I do the way of Jesus? I'm not a Christian. And we don't expect you to at Hope Church. If you don't claim to follow Jesus, we do not expect you to do the things that Jesus recommends. But I will encourage you to take a look at it because Jesus was the most productive person who ever lived. We talked about that a little bit last week, but he got more done in less time than literally any person who's ever lived. So I think just from a productivity standpoint, his life is worth examining. And he did it in a way that was never rushed or hurried or distracted. He lived his life at the speed of love. And it was a pace that gave rest to his inner life, to his soul. So I think he's worth examining for that reason alone. For those of us who are Christians, following Jesus does not just mean that we believe he lived a sinless life and then died on a cross to forgive our sins so we could be made children of God. It also means he lived a sinless life, and as God's children, we want to emulate his life so that we can lead godly lives, and we all want to lead lives of flourishing, where we're thriving in our inner lives. So today, the habit, the practice that we're going to learn from Jesus is the habit of silence and solitude. Silence and solitude. How many of you remember the experience, and it was still around in the 90s. I don't think it exists really anymore. How many of you remember that quaint thing from the 90s? And we called it, I haven't thought of it in a while, what is it? Boredom. How many of you remember being bored? Anybody remember being bored? Yeah, you Gen Zers, you have no idea. See, for you, being bored is your app takes 2 seconds to load. You're like, why is this taking so long, right? Okay, but before we had infinity in our front pockets, boredom was part of life, okay? When you are on a long road trip and you do not have any podcasts to listen to because podcasts do not exist, okay? That's boredom. When you're on a flight and you finish your book, all you can do is stare at the clouds. That is boredom, okay? This was a defining feature of our childhoods, of those of us who are a little bit older, the appreciation of being bored. Do you remember? This was so weird about days when people were bored. You would be standing in line at the grocery store, and the person next to you would just start talking to you. And you don't even know them. But they just start striking up a conversation with you, right? Because that's what we did when we were bored. Now, boredom wasn't all bad. And the fact that we've gained so much in terms of technology and advancement, and quite frankly, I like having just about all of the knowledge of all of civilization in my pocket. I think that's pretty handy. I like the productivity that we have of a digitally connected age. But we gave something up when we gave up boredom in exchange for all of this. You see, boredom were those moments in your day to reflect, to look back, to look forward, to take inventory in your inner life. Boredom were those moments of the day that could potentially become a gateway to prayer, to meditation, to seeing again God's presence and goodness in this world all around us. See, silence and solitude is a spiritual habit. It's not pursuing boredom, but it's acknowledging that we live in a world where there is no quietness, where there is no space to be alone with our thoughts and to be alone with God. And it is the intentional practice of creating that in our everyday lives. Now, the first thing I want to show you is that this was something that was incredibly important to Jesus, and he did not have a cell phone. Yet, in his ministry, this was a frequent and important practice that he employed. In Luke chapter 5, here's what we're told about his pace of life. We're told, yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him. and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to the lonely places and prayed. See, this is the opposite of what our culture says. Oh, you're finally making it. You're finally getting noticed. You're finally getting a crowd. Crowds of people are finally coming out to hear you. Now's the time to push pedal down. You can't take vacation. You can't take a break. You got to strike while the iron's hot. Go, 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 go. But when all the crowds came out to Jesus, what did he do? He would go off to be in a lonely place so he could pray. So he could be alone with his own soul and with his Father and refresh. And when did he do that? He did that often. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places. This was his regular habit. In fact, this was how he started his whole ministry. What's interesting is if you read the 4 biographical sketches we have of the life of Jesus that are in the New Testament, included in the New Testament, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all start the story in different places. Luke's the one we read at Christmas, right? You know, with the angels and the shepherds and all that. Matthew tells a little bit of the Christmas story, not as much. But then he gets to the place where Jesus was baptized. So the last thing Jesus did before his, what we might call his public ministry began, was he went to the Jordan River Valley where John the Baptist was baptizing people, and he said, I want to be baptized. So when Jesus was baptized, he came up out of the water, and when he did, a voice from heaven said, this is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. And immediately, we're told, the Holy Spirit led Jesus out into the wilderness, into a lonely place where he was alone for 40 days. And during that time, he fasted, which is another spiritual habit. We're not actually getting to it in this series, but we probably should, because to fast is to practice self-denial. To fast is to say no to every impulse I have so I can lean more fully into God. It's such an un-American thing. Deny your every impulse that you have. But that's what Jesus practiced. So he's out in the desert. He's practicing these habits of being alone with his thoughts and alone with God. And he's meditating on Scripture and he's fasting. And Satan tempts him and then Satan leaves him. And then he comes back after 40 days and he's ready for his first day on the job. Now, that's where Mark picks up the story. Mark chapter 1 is essentially his first day on the job as Messiah, and it is a whirlwind day. He's up early, he's teaching in the synagogue, he heals Peter's mother-in-law over lunchtime. You know, let's take a lunch break. Still got to do a healing. People are coming to him till very late in the day, asking for help, asking for healing, and he's just working all day long. Now, how does he recover after his first long day in ministry? Mark chapter 135. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. He doesn't go out for brunch with his disciples. He doesn't sleep in late because it was a long day and he just needs to catch up on some sleep. But while it's still dark out, he gets up. And now remember this. He just spent 40 days in solitude, comes back for one day of work, and heads right back out to practice more silence and solitude. That's how foundational this spiritual habit was for Jesus. By the way, when I talk about spiritual habit, all I'm talking about is posturing your mind and your body in a way to realign with God and tap into the power of His Holy Spirit. Okay, it's what you do with your mind and body to posture yourself in a way that I'm going to realign with God and connect with the power of His Holy Spirit. For Jesus, He's like, I need that. I need to be realigned with my Father in heaven. I need time and space alone with my Father in heaven and with my own soul. So He goes right back out into the lonely place, a solitary place, where he can pray after one day on the job. And this was so important, he decided his disciples into this practice as well. He's with them for 3 years, and after he leaves, they're going to be on their own. So he's already instilling this practice, encouraging this habit for them. Look at Mark chapter 6. It said, then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a and get some rest. See, again, this is the opposite of what our culture does. What does our culture do? It's like, man, it was a long day. Let's go out and get some drinks. Relax, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but Jesus says, hey, listen, we need a deeper rest. We don't just need to distract ourselves from the hurry. We don't just need to cover up and mask the fact that we're exhausted. You need something that will actually give rest to your soul. So we are going to go to a quiet place by ourselves so that we can be alone in God's presence and in the presence of our own souls. Next verse says, so they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. Let's just go. We need to be alone. And again, this was before the modern world. This was just people coming because they needed help. Jesus said, we need a rhythm. Where part of that rhythm is we retreat to a solitary place to be alone with God and with your own soul. And he invited you guys into this as well. Look at what he said in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Can't you pray in your car driving down I-94 to your work? Of course you can. But Jesus said, I want you also to create the habit of going into your room where you are alone, where your Father can see what is done in secret. So when I talk about the habit of silence and solitude, here's my definition of it. Here's silence and solitude. Intentional time to be alone with God and with your own soul. Intentional time. This is part of your schedule. This is part of your plan. This is part of your agenda. This is what you do with your day. Intentional time, strategic time to be alone with God and with your own soul. Now, I want to break down the two components of silence and solitude. The first one is silence. Okay, silence. What is silence? Okay, this is not a trick question. Silence is quiet. You go to a place where your phone is not in the room with you. Did you know that a survey showed that 77% of Americans acknowledge that the second they feel bored, they reach for their phone? Okay, psychologists call that compulsive behavior at best and perhaps addictive. Leave your phone in another room. Go somewhere where it is quiet. Maybe it's nature. Maybe you take a walk in nature. Maybe it's in a room in your house where no one can get to you. Maybe it's during nap time for your kids, depending on your season of life. But you're going to go to a place where you're going to have a period of just external silence. Now, external silence can be an unsettling thing because we're so unfamiliar with it and so not used to it. Now, do you know where the quietest place in the world is? The quietest place in the world is in Minneapolis, where engineers built what is called an anechoic chamber. An anechoic chamber is a room where it's designed in a way where all echo, all sound is completely absorbed within the walls. Now, as I was researching this, I was sitting at home alone. The refrigerator was running, the furnace was running, and 2 rooms away, the laundry was going. And I took out my decibel meter, and I measured how loud is this room. It was 50 decibels. An anechoic chamber, that's just sitting home alone, and I don't have any pets. An anechoic chamber is -9 decibels. It is complete, utter, and absolute silence. NASA uses an anechoic chamber to train astronauts because space is a vacuum. Sound waves do not travel. It is stunningly silent, which totally bummed me out when I learned that, because all those cool explosions in Star Wars, nobody could hear them. Like, what gives? That is so unrealistic, George Lucas. I mean, in space, no one can hear you scream. So NASA trains their astronauts in a room like this to get them used to the idea of complete silence. Now, when people go into the anechoic chamber, here's what they report. It is an unnerving experience, because when you go into that kind of room, the first thing you can hear is your breathing, then your clothes rustling if you move, and then you can hear the blood flowing through your brain. Then you can hear your heartbeat, and then you can hear your bones rubbing against each other every time you move, and eventually you can even hear your skin sliding across your muscles. People report feelings of anxiety, dizziness, and even nausea being in a room of absolute silence. External silence is unnerving. But I think for many of us who will never be in an anechoic chamber, there's a different reason why silence is unnerving. It's because as soon as we get into a place where there's silence around us, the noise rises up inside of us. The mental chatter begins. You start thinking about the dumb thing you said, or the way that someone wronged you and you would love to get back at them. Or the worry kicks in, and you start catastrophizing the future and how this could go wrong and that could go wrong. And the voices just talk, 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 talk. And so we try to mask external silence with white noise. If you're home alone, you might turn on the TV or listen to the radio or put in podcasts, have something to do, to have something to do to distract us from how uncomfortable it is to have silence around us, because many times that's when our inner life gets noisy. But the practice of silence is not just practicing external silence, but it is a habit that eventually, if you practice consistently, will also lead to inner silence. And that's the goal of silence and solitude. It's one of the goals. And it won't happen at first. I'm just telling you, if you're anything like a normal person, there will not be inner silence at first. It will be incredibly uncomfortable. But if you are willing to take on the yoke of Jesus, this practice will lead to a quiet inner life as well. So that's silence, external and internal silence. Okay, the second half is solitude. Solitude means alone, but not isolation. Solitude is proactive. Isolation is reactive. Solitude opens yourself up to God. Isolation opens yourself up to temptation. So it's just a place to go and intentionally be alone with God and with your own soul. So if there's this set period of time, it's intentional time to be alone with God and with your own soul. That's silence and solitude. Now, here's why this is so important. Without silence and solitude, number one, we will never know ourselves. We will never know God. Because it requires a relationship. To know anyone, you can know about God without knowing God. Knowing God, like any relationship, requires dedicated, focused attention and time. And if we want to know God, we need to hear from God. And many times, in our noisy, distracted world, God's voice is the voice that is drowned out in our lives. And we have to clear the deck and push the noise away so we can hear from the voice that will cut through all of the noise and chatter in our inner lives. So without it, we're not going to know God. Second, we will never know ourselves. See, if we always mask our feelings and distract ourselves from our own feelings and whatever's going on inside and never listen to what's going on beneath the surface and pay attention to it and deal with it, well, we'll never know that without creating silence for that to rise to the surface. And we'll never be able to change. We'll never have the power to change because we won't know what's going on down there. But when we recognize what's going on, we bring it into the presence of God and tap into His power, we'll have the power to change. You see, this is the time of year when your New Year's resolutions all begin to fail. It's because willpower will only carry you so far. It's when on our inner lives we change what matters, we change what loves, we prioritize the power of God in our lives, that lasting, godly change begins to happen. So, how do we do this? Let's get kind of practical for a minute of what this looks like to practice silence and solitude. Okay, you say, okay, I made time. What do I do now? Literally, there are dozens of things you could do with this space. Here's a few ideas to prime the pump. Slow down. Again, you leave your phone in the other room. You just go to a place where during this set time, you can slow down. Did some of those thoughts come to your head? Maybe have a pad of paper and just write them down so your brain can be quiet for a minute. Breathe. Literally, take some very slow, long, deep breaths. Ground yourself. Come back to the present. See, we spend way too much of our lives living in the past and living in the future. We look back at regret or pain, or we look in the future and worry. No, just come back right here to this moment. God gave you this moment as a gift. So come back to the present. feel the feelings. We're not aware of everything we're feeling until we have a quiet place of solitude. That's where things that are hidden beneath the surface start to bubble up to the forefront. Now, this might just be me, but I don't think it is. Guess which feelings come up first? The negative ones, the anxious ones, the worried ones, the guilty ones. Those are the ones that always, for me, I know, the feelings that come up when I get to silence and solitude is never, man, I'm a great person today. No, not for me. Probably not healthy if that were the thought that came up. But those are the things that come up for me. But that's important. Lean into that. Feel those feels. All right? And then pray them out to God. Whatever's coming up to the surface, whatever is rattling around in your heart, just pray that out to God. God, here's how I'm feeling today. Can I talk about this with you? Next, turn to His Word. Maybe there's a verse of the day you have. Maybe there's a really simple Bible reading you plan. But it's important to listen to the voice that cuts through your feelings and the noise and tells you the truth about who God is. That He's sovereign, that He's good, that He loves you and who you are. You're His child and you're loved and you have a home with Him forever. And He's with you right now. Listen to His Word. Practice gratitude. Okay, this is so big. We live in a world where everything that is screaming for our attention says doom and gloom, negative, they're idiots, they hate America, blah, right? It rewires our brain to see negative things. And Jesus said, whatever you put into your heart is what's going to come out of your heart. Practice gratitude. Look at all the good God is doing in your life and in our world. Practice gratitude. Here's another important one. Confess sin. Oh, this one requires humility. But I promise you, whatever you're all upset about, it's going to get real small when you own your sin to your Creator and tell Him how you messed up yesterday. Next, practice gratitude. You're like, you covered that one. Yeah, but this is next level gratitude when you know that Jesus forgives that sin because He loves you. That's a new well of gratitude that comes out from within us. Now, again, there's dozens of things you can do with your structured time, but this is a list of some great ideas to help get you started. Now, the purpose of this is not to check a box and say, I'm a good Christian today, look what I did. The purpose is to be present with God. Here's what Jesus said in John 15. He said, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain, some translations say abide, if you remain in me, if you abide in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. The purpose is to push aside the noise of our busy culture and our busy world and our busy schedules and say, just for this moment, for this set time, I am going to remain in Jesus. And I will allow Him to remain in me, and we will abide together in this sacred space. And that's a gift Jesus wants you to have. Now, the Apostle Paul, who after Jesus Christ, I would argue is the most productive person of the last 2 millennia, based on what he got done in his life, here's the encouragement that he gave us when it comes to this practice. I love this verse. He said, make it your ambition. Okay, you want to be ambitious people? Great. Be ambitious people. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. That's an ambition that will be fruitful and make a difference. So, here's your homework. Here's what you've been waiting for. I know, that's why you come to church. I hope the preacher gives us homework to do. I can't wait. Well, don't worry, here we are. If you grabbed a program on the way in, message notes, make sure you get that out right now, because I've got a real simple exercise for you. If you didn't grab them on the way in, grab them on your way out. When you get to your car, write this down. If you're at home, grab a piece of paper right now and fill this in. Here's your homework. Fill in these blanks. That's your homework. And here's the reason why. Research is conclusive. If you write down a plan, the odds of you actually doing it go through the roof. So if you've been listening to this and you had all said, yeah, it is a noisy world, I would really like to have that space of quiet to be alone with God and my soul, great. Here's your homework. Fill this out. If you're like, not me, I want more noise, I want that schizophrenia approach to life. Yeah, more sensory gating, please. Then you don't have to do this, okay? It's up to you. Here's your homework. I will spend blank minutes in silence and solitude every day this week. Now, you pick your number. I will say this, when it comes to any spiritual habit, including the ones we're going to be talking about for the rest of the series, here's the rule. Do as you can, not as you can't. Do as you can, not as you can't. If you do not do this today, don't write in 60 minutes. It's not going to happen. If you don't do this today, I advise writing in the number 5. Now, you do you, that's fine. And here's what's going to happen. If you don't do this today and you literally set a timer, and you should, you need to set a timer for this so you know how long it is, and leave your phone in the other room with the alarm turned up real loud so you know when 5 minutes goes by, this is going to feel like an hour, okay? If you don't practice this, this is going to feel like an hour, and the first time, oh my goodness, it's going to be painful. I'm just letting you know up front how it's going to go. It's going to be painful. And if the only prayer you can pray out in that 5 minutes before your mind wanders off is, God, Jesus told us to do this, and the way I'm approaching life is not working, so I'm just trying this. Do you know how your Heavenly Father is going to react to that? He's going to see what you do in secret, and He's going to reward you. And you just come back the next day because you're making a commitment right now. I'm going to spend blank minutes a day in silence and solitude. Put it on your schedule and make it happen. It's not doing this one time that makes the difference. It's the practice of this that will lead to a place, a rhythm in your life where you have a quiet inner life. And that's what God wants for you. So, I will spend blank minutes a day in silence and solitude every day this week. I will do it at blank o'clock. Get clear. Get realistic. What time are you going to do it? And I will do it in blank location. Write it down. Again, unless you don't want that, unless you don't want what Jesus is inviting you to. But that's your challenge. That's your homework. Fill this out. And spend time every day this week in silence, in solitude. And here's the blessing I want to send you out with as to why this matters. It's in Psalm 46, verse 10, where we're told, be still and know that I am God. Do you want to know how you can know that God really is God? That He really is good? That He really is with you? That He really does have a plan and purpose for your life? That in the end He will take all things, even the unpleasant things, even the unpainful things, and He will work them out for good? The way you know that is by being still. You will never know that God is God by being busy. You will never know that God is God by being hurried. You will never know that God is God by being distracted. But if you want to know that God is with you and for you and has a purpose for you, it will only come when you decide to be still. So I want to do what we did last week and create a space for you to be still and hear this invitation from Jesus. I'm going to ask you in just a second to close your eyes. And again, if you say, I'm not closing my eyes, preacher, I don't, fine. You're missing out. I mean, you came all this way to be here at church on Sunday. You're watching at home. You made the effort to be here. Just take this moment. I'm going to give you 60 seconds right now to begin practicing silence and solitude before you go back out into that very noisy world we live in. So would you close your eyes right now and listen to this invitation from Jesus? Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still.